In this episode, we speak to a former lawyer who traded his partnership track to head the product compliance function at a leading local RegTech company in his area of expertise, employment law. This is Law Encoded, episode 15 of the Field Trip podcast. Let's go. Andrew Stirling is the head of product compliance at Tanda, the world's #1 platform for rostering, attendance, labour insights and workforce success, and a local Brisbane technology success story. Andrew has been in this role for about 18 months, following him making the very bold decision to leave solid partnership prospects at a top-tier law firm. We go wide with Andrew, with discussion including what prompted him to make this significant career pivot, the challenges and successes of his journey so far, and the broad gap between the thinking of lawyers and software engineers and how he is successfully bridging that divide. We also dig deep into our respective views on what technology is doing and what it might do to the way law is practiced. A great conversation. We hope you enjoy. Andrew Stirling, you are the head of product compliance at Tanda. Welcome to the Field Trip.
Thanks for having me, Alistair.
It's a pleasure. Where does this podcast find you today?
I am sitting in my study at home.
And home being just generally?
In Brisbane.
It's interesting.
Nice
I was thinking about that before. Pre-pandemic, I would always go out and meet with people and we'd do something in person. So you're probably about a 20-minute drive away from where I am at the moment, and yet, it's just the way we do it now. It's much easier to do this over a Zoom call. So
it is.
That's the way the world is going. Can we start just? The things that really interest me in you and what you've done, Andrew, and why I was keen to have a chat with you here is twofold. One, you've got an interesting transition in career from being in a big law firm to a different style of role, and I think those kinds of transitions, particularly at a senior level like you've done, are really interesting, and I'm keen to unpack that a little bit. And also the company you're working for, Tanda, which I'll let you explain, is a technology company, and there's an overlap with what it does and perhaps with what lawyers do or have done in the past. And again, I think that bit is interesting as well. So they're kind of the two themes of what I wanted to have a chat about today. But let's start just with the boring, perhaps a poor word. Can we start with your bio? What's your background? How have you arrived professionally at where you are at today?
Well, professionally, I have a pretty simple story. I started at Allens as a graduate in 2007. Worked in Brisbane, worked here for a few years, moved interstate for a few years down to Melbourne. And in that time, I always worked as an employment and safety lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask just to interject, what drew you to that practice area to start with?
Good question. So when I was an undergrad applying for jobs, I thought you needed a more compelling answer to the question, why do you want to work in commercial law than just, I don't know, I don't like family law and I don't like criminal, which turns out to be the most stock standard answer, to be honest, in those interviews. But
it's a fairly binary choice at that early stage. I don't know how people could have the understanding of what it's like to practice in those areas to choose it. That's certainly what I did.
Yeah, and but I'm very interested in politics, maybe a little less so now than I was as a student. And I did an economics degree. And so I liked that tension in labour law between capital and labour. And that interested me. And so I thought, well, I'm going to say something better than I just like commercial law and I know I don't want to do the other stuff, then I'll float that. And it just became a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. I never, unlike most people at Allens, I never rotated, just stayed in that team. I really enjoyed it. It was just a timing thing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do instead. and at the time that I was about to rotate, one of the senior associates in the team went on parental leave. So I stayed, and then it's one of those things, like those cycles, the graduate rotation cycles just happen year on year, and once you get out of whack of it, you stay where you are. And I was happy to do that.
That's interesting, because certainly my story, and a lot of stories I hear from other people, when you dig into that question about where you started, a lot of the time it's just I found a fit with people in a team in the firm that I was at, and that then I enjoyed the environment, so therefore I enjoyed the work that surrounded that environment. That's a far more well considered approach as a junior lawyer than I can talk to. That's for sure.
If I'd not liked the people, then it would have been a different story. But I had a very good mentor in Jamie Wells, and really enjoyed working with John Norton as well. So the team, I love that team. It was a great team. It was a great place to start.
Sorry, I broke your stride.
No.
You were down in Melbourne.
Moved to Melbourne and worked there for a few years. Came back and for a few more years at Allens before I moved to Tanda.
And so, what is it that I think? I don't think we need to go into the detail of what it's like to be an employment lawyer. I think people either listening to this will either know that or be able to guess. But Tanda is interesting. What is it that you do at Tanda?
So at Tanda, I'm the head of product compliance. Tanda itself is it solves two business problems. One is paying people correctly, in particular under the complexities of Australia's award system. And the second business problem is getting the right people in the right place at the right time. So rostering and attendance is a function, I guess. And so it's my responsibility to focus Tanda on solving those problems in a way that complies with Australian employment laws primarily.
Right. And what is it, so just not to get too far ahead of ourselves, that transition that you made, I mentioned in the intro, that's at a reasonably senior level. You were a managing associate at Allens, which is sort of the level below partner. You certainly had sort of a history and a reputation that, whether it be there or elsewhere, you certainly had prospects to take it further in the stream of working in a law firm. Why switch to a software company?
Well, like all of those moves, there are big pull factors. In the case of Tanda, a growing business. I'd known the founders for a very long time before they founded the business.
Socially, through work, or was it just a random?
Kind of both. They when I was working in employment law, I kept an interest of sorts in student politics and ended up doing some legal work for some of the student unions. And the founders of Tanda, or at least two of them, were president and general secretary, I think, of the QUT Student Guild. And I did some work for them, and that's how I got to know them. And then we stayed in touch pretty regularly after that.
Interesting. So was it a random conversation that had them say, actually we're kind of looking for someone in that, for a role, and the light bulb went off? Did it work the other way? How did that come about?
Well, they were actually looking for, Tanda had just acquired a business called Portner Press, which runs an employment law and health and safety law handbook. And they'd acquired that from an American an American company, and they were looking for someone within Tanda who understood the law, but who could work on the management of that, especially the transition from all the post acquisition stuff, all that transition stuff.
So you were bedding down an acquisition effectively.
Yeah, effectively, and because I knew the content, and in those early days of ownership of that business, I think they thought financially it wasn't going to be going as well as it actually was, and there might have needed to be some bigger decisions than ultimately we made around how the content was managed and delivered, but hence the need for someone who knew what the content was. And but as it's transpired, I think things are ticking along pretty well in that business. But so they got me on primarily to do that, and there was a whole team in Port-au-Prince, so there was still a good amount of my time that I could dedicate to other things. And part of what I was working on also at the same time was, at that time at least, was selling Tanda in a different way. So we set up a business called Tanda Paysure, which the idea behind that was to use Tanda's award engine, so algorithm, and do back payment calculations. It was very big. It's not so much at the moment, but it'll come back, all of the wage underpayment stuff. So part of the pull to Tanda was to do that. I just think that's a really fascinating thing that could be automated much more than it currently is. And so there were pull factors into Tanda, and I'd done a lot of reflecting. I think I now look back at my time at Allen's as sort of more as setting me up for success at Tanda. I loved a lot about being a lawyer, but I think the hours were sort of inconsistent with what I wanted to be as a parent. And you had to make a lot of sacrifices, and I just didn't want to keep making them, to be honest. And I'd also been a managing associate and heading up the practice in Brisbane for about 4 years. By the time I left, I thought that was probably long enough to have given that a shake. Maybe if I'd stayed longer, people say that I would have been a partner next time around. I thought, well, I thought I'd done
you would
long
have
enough.
You would have had those, those options there, or if not there, elsewhere as well. I mean, you're at that level and that standard. So, I think it is an interesting story of why you made that transition. And just reflecting on a point you made there about how you look at your time at Allen's as setting you up for the next role. I think that's a really excellent way to think about any work at any time, that any step in your professional journey. And I must admit, I've always looked for a new challenge. I'm someone who likes to pick up new skills, and it's less about meeting a certain role or level of pay or anything like that. It's not promotion for promotion's sake. It's just the ongoing challenge. But each of, even if I reflect on what I do now, there are building blocks along the way that have enabled me to get here. And perhaps in hindsight, look and go, it's not terribly surprising I've ended up here. So I like the way you describe that, because I think you can look at that as any, whether you're in the same organisation or you're moving organisations, it's everything you do at a particular time is always setting you up for whatever the next challenge might be. So nicely put. I want to steer the conversation a bit from just triggered by one of the comments that you made, or prompted, not triggered, by one of the comments you made before about the nature of the Tanda product. Would you describe Tanda as legal tech, or would it be in that space?
Well, it probably not as legal tech. Reg tech definitely.
Yes.
I don't know if you think there's a difference between legal tech and reg tech. I think there is. But we decided to put a pin in the idea of Tanda Paysure in the middle of last year, and refocus, I guess, my energy on the core product and the core solution that we take to customers, which I think is a very sensible idea.
But in a way, the Paysure was an extension of the engine, as you describe it. It was
Yes,
sort of pointing the functionality you've built at another potential use case.
Yeah, that's right.
As sort of the market is showing interest or not in whatever you're looking at.
Yeah.
Now, I ask that question. I think there's certainly a grey area between reg tech and legal tech, and to be honest, not a whole lot turns on it. But what I am interested in is where, and again, you touched on it in an earlier comment, how much of what is done by the Tanda product is replacing work that employment lawyers either do now or would have done, and you've been doing it for long enough to have seen any erosion of workflow on account of a product like this or similar?
Well, it's certainly taking away. What's a better way of putting it? Once you've configured Tanda, and in some respects, the configurations are already done for you, or can be done for you. You don't need to go back, or you shouldn't need to go back to the well for employment advice on probably in two key things that I would say. One is interpretation of awards. So we have a process internally to interpret awards and then turn that into code. So if you plug into our awards, then you're not going back and asking your lawyers for advice on how the award should be interpreted. And then is that bread and butter for a lot of employment lawyers out there? I wouldn't say that every day you've got someone calling you for that kind of advice. But there are plenty of lawyers and accountants that have spent a lot of time over the last few years in back payment reconciliation processes. So they're looking at those sort of questions after the fact rather than before the fact. So potentially, and don't let me put words in your mouth if it's not right, but is it a bit more of an indirect impact on the kind of work that people that lawyers may have done by, proactively managing these issues and avoiding problems down the track? Yes. Yeah, but that's the idea. I mean, the whole point of the solving those problems, the payroll calculation, and making sure your rosters and attendance systems are compliant, it's to avoid problems in the first place. And we do other things like there's onboarding processes that can take away some of the stuff that you might also go and get advice on from time to time, or at least you might do it once and then you don't do it again. And that's sort of before you get to the port and press side of things, which is literally content, practical content that is about employment law and health and safety law. Yep. Running in parallel. So I'm still on the management board of Port and Press as well, which that really is getting at the heart of answering or solving questions before you take the next step and get legal advice if you need it. And it's an interesting way of unpacking the impact of technology on the legal process and the legal industry, and I think there's an enormous amount in this
preventative side, I think a lot of work that lawyers do comes from things not being well organised, and that's not
Mm.
a critical comment. It's very hard to get all of your your ducks in a row when you're trying to run a business and do a whole lot of
Yes.
other things. So problems do arise. So
Yeah.
having a framework in which things happen that better manages the administration of those things can lead to better outcomes at the end. So that's sort of one area of impact, I suppose. There's a direct thing, like saying taking calls, small advice stuff, and it sounds like Port and Press is a broadening of that again. But a lot of I don't know if there's an equivalent term in the legal industry, but they talk about in say fintech, they talk about dealing with the unbanked, people who don't currently use financial services. So it's less of an impact on existing industry or products and services and more just creating a new market when it's there. And I wonder with something like management of employees, whether a lot of the kind of stuff that people might be coming to Tanda for is stuff that they would have just, they would have winged it before, basically, and
No,
made their way
absolutely.
through it. And so again, this is more of an additive, an additive service than one that erodes what's currently done.
No, you're spot on. So we sort of think about customers, they have similar problems, but as the size of the business, as the business gets bigger, the problems change a little. And for our enterprise customers, so our bigger customers, they usually have some sort of workforce management solution before Tanda. But for small business, usually what they're switching from is nothing. It's spreadsheets, it's bits of paper, it's the old Word roster or something. It's so by adopting solutions like Tanda, they are definitely taking a proactive step in managing their compliance. Without taking advice.
Yeah, no, it's just an interesting little representation of the broader legal industry technology interplay, I think. Just taking a slight step to the side, and like you mentioned about, I want to come back to this, don't let me forget, you mentioned the process of converting regulation into code before. Even at a personal level, I'm fascinated to hear how you do that to the extent that you're willing to share, but I'll come back to that. But more at a generic level, you've transitioned from a strictly legal role into one that draws on your legal skills, but is not a legal role. So tell us about an average day, just in terms of makeup and the kinds of things that you're doing and how that differs. And perhaps if you can talk a bit about the skills that you've brought with you that are really useful as a lawyer, or legal skills that you're bringing across, and also the things that you've really had to work on to sort of get up to speed in this new role.
A lot. I've had to work on a lot. But let me start with the skills that were transferable.
Well, can I just, sorry, I should have compounded my question. What does an average day look like?
What is an average? An average day. I on an average day would I'm part of our product development process. So we have a team that I obviously don't code anything myself, but I am part of our sort of problem and solution identification process. So on a typical day, I would be thinking through customer problems and looking at solutions to those. So talking to customers about that. I, on a typical day, would be generally chatting to at least one or two people about either an award interpretation point or a statute interpretation point.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty common. I do a lot of work with our sales team. So tenders, talking to prospective clients, and I do a lot of work with our implementation team.
Mm-hmm.
So configurations and people double checking interpretations on new accounts and
Yep.
things like that. Probably the bulk of my time is on how can we make Tanda even better.
Right. And is it more collaborative?
It
sounds like it's more collaborative than life as a private practice lawyer.
Yes, it is. Way more collaborative because I can't do it all myself, I think. And I guess with private practice, the model is, sorry, I don't guess, the model with private practice is you have a person at the top who's like the chief paper reviewer, and you've got people chugging away creating bits of paper, and then you get the bits of paper and you put some red pen on them and etc. That sort of got increasingly
product
lonely.
Development cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. It can be a bit of a lonely process.
Yep.
And yeah, because I can't be that. I can't be the person who does the code because I don't know anything about it. I have to be the person who feeds my bit into the process. And that's a good thing.
I'm going to jump into it now.
And a bad thing. Yeah.
I'm taking you off track. So what does that look like then? Your interface as what the software community would call the domain expert. You're the legal expert. How do you interface with the technical team, the developers, to make sure that the algorithm and rule sets that they embed in the system by way of code are matching the requirements that you prescribe as the expert in that area? Yeah,
well, it's a pretty difficult process. But I mean, it starts with, I guess it starts with me and my interpretations.
Yep.
And a lot of it's ambiguous. So sometimes you go external, talk to the Fair Work Ombudsman about what they might think the interpretation should be.
Moving past the legal questions there. So assuming you've got all of that bedded down, you've got a rule set of some description that needs to be embedded in the system. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we already have the vast majority of the payrolls automated. So at this point, we're taking it as far as we can. It's
automated in the sense that they've been reduced to code, or automated in the sense that you've got some fancy way of taking a piece of regulation, like a new piece of regulation, and having that at least partially converted into code.
Yeah. So it's once you've done the interpretation piece, you can get into the UI and configure a rule that will apply that to a timesheet.
Yep. So it's you at the back end that you're doing that, are you? So they've got effectively a rule building system there with certain parameters that you can take and embed the logic in that way. Not
me personally. I don't sort of sit there and fiddle around with the UI, but we have a team of people who, I mean, I know how to do it. I can do it. We have a team of people that do it, and we've got it embedded in sort of hard-coded entire rule sets, which we keep updated, which are in combination reflective of the relevant awards.
Yep.
So there's that sort of interpretation piece. Let's put all these things together and stick them. We can configure, and then there's we've taken the payroll calculator this far. Let's now do the rule that says, in a fortnight you can only work 8 shifts that are 10 hours long. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's let's just keep iterating on the rule set that we completely automate.
Yeah, and so
Um,
for that, is so at some point you've got to be giving a set of instructions, and I go into this because it's been like it's a process that I've had to develop through trial and error in
yes.
dealing with software development teams, and I'm constantly improving. I'm certainly iterating on the process that I use. But are you sitting there? Are you drawing like tree diagrams with, or a decision map that you're handing over to that team? Is it like a written document, more text? I'm doubting that, but what do you hand over, and then at the end, how do you test that? Who does the testing? How does that work?
Yeah. So I come up with a document that says, let's do that rule that I just said.
Yep.
Let's automate that now. And I sit with an engineer, and the engineer says, sort of scratches the chin and says, okay, well, we can already do the rule that if you work this many shifts in a fortnight that you get overtime, what we'd need to do is we'd need to add in the bit that says those shifts need to also be 10 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is what it would look like in the UI, and they work on how it works in the code and whatever else. And then when it gets to QA, then I sit there and just create timesheets and make sure it works the way you expect it to.
It's
Basically.
mind-numbing, isn't it? Do you find that the testing of the system and
Yeah.
trying to be thorough with the different sort of combinations
Yes.
of entry and other things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. But you need to be thorough,
Yeah.
and so that's once something comes out the back end, then I'm in the QA process as well.
Interesting.
Hmm.
No, I wanted to dig into that because
No.
I'm selfish to understand how somebody else does something that
Yeah.
I find takes a lot of my time in developing product. But I think,
Yeah.
certainly for lawyers listening to this who are interested in legal tech and haven't had any exposure to the process of building a particular piece of functionality or product, it really just does get down to quite simple and laborious interchange of ideas and standards and testing and other things. So
that's it.
Oh, good. You're making me feel better about myself, which is
No,
ultimately what this is all about.
I don't think there's any shortcuts.
No.
It takes a lot of work.
So before I distracted you there, so your day is more collaborative, say, than a standard lawyer. What are there things that you learned as a lawyer that you're going, gee, I never realised how strong a skill that was and how useful that is outside of a legal context or a strict law firm environment?
Well, I mean, aside from like the sort of directly, there was an amendment to the Fair Work Act that just went through the Senate. So I'm the one that reads that and goes, this is what that means for us. Do we need to do anything? Yes, no. And aside from sort of the award interpretation and statutory interpretation, there's plenty. I mean, you get very well trained in identifying problems and hypothesizing solutions, coming up with solutions. I mean, that's basically law in a nutshell. You're just applying a set of things that you've learned and experiences that you've had in other situations to a new set of facts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very useful skill for anything, I think. So I think that's sort of been directly transferable. As well as things like you get good at writing a good memo. Hopefully you're relatively clear in what you're asking people and suggesting to people, even if I found engineers can talk a different language, and that's another story. But
that's without doubt.
yeah,
Although to be fair, they would probably say that
no, correct.
lawyers talk a different language. But I think if you're taking the sort of the commercial sector as
Yeah,
an average, and the software development is a different beast.
yeah. And I mean, communication is a two-way street, and if someone doesn't understand what you're saying, that's as much
It's at
your
least
problem as
partially your
theirs.
fault.
Well, it is 100%. And presenting, getting in front of people and chatting to them about what we're doing in compliance and that sort of thing. All of those skills are readily transferable. And I think also I never made it to the pinnacle of partnership, but I was pretty close. And I think when you spend that amount of time at a place that values excellence very highly, you know what it takes in a way to replicate that somewhere else. I think that's useful too.
That's a really good observation, actually. I think it's easy. It's a funny dynamic in law firms. The system does require and deliver a very high output of work, despite people's view of things. You have a lot of bright people working incredibly hard. Yes, they get paid a lot of money, but that is certainly a factor. But it's interesting. So as I'm reflecting on the process that I've been through over the last 5 years since not being in a law firm, you do take that to the next level. You do say, well, even though that's not my thing, I can see that's good, but that's not yet good enough. That's not great, and it does have you push to to those higher standards. So that's really interesting observation.
I guess that if you know how to get there, you can not short circuit it, because I just think sometimes you just need time to do things. You just need experiences, but you know what you had to do to be successful. Like for me, it was I read a lot at Allen's. I used to take cases, like big bundles of cases, on holidays before we had kids, and just read them.
I wouldn't say that out loud. and you still?
No, I don't read cases with anything like the frequency. I maybe should. Only the big ones. But what I do now is I have just spent 18 months immersing myself in books about software and business and sales and product management and development cycles. And because the information's there, I guess. Someone's thought of these things before. People have had these experiences and thankfully write about them. And so you just need to find those things, and that's the sort of the software equivalent of reading cases, and you can sort of fast track some of your experience by doing that.
No, I hear you on that. I certainly spend quite a bit of time doing that, although I must say I sort of opt for video content more than written materials. So never afraid to take a short online course to learn about different things, or watch YouTube clips on what others would consider to be quite boring topics while I'm washing the dishes at night. You fit it in where you can. It's a sad sharing of existence that you and I have just published to the world, Andrew.
Well, for me, it's audiobooks, because I never get a chance to sit down and read aside from Christmas holidays. So just have the headphones in when I'm doing the dishes instead of videos.
Cases probably haven't moved to audiobook status.
No.
I'm guessing.
No.
that would be interesting. Okay, I'm going to change course here, break up. As often happens with conversations I find interesting, we tend to need to keep an eye on the time. So I want to hit you with some rapid fire questions that have nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but just to sort of pick up the pace and get a different insight to you. So this is just would you like A or B? What's your preference? So remote work or in the office?
In the office.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
What's a known vice, a vice of yours others would know about?
I'm a sweet tooth.
Right. What's a vice that people wouldn't know about? You can pass. You get one pass in this list.
Make that the pass.
Okay. How do you unwind, other than reading cases?
Other than reading cases, usually with a G&T.
Right. So this is the third podcast in a row I've had a dog barking outside. We're just going to push on, notwithstanding. A gin and tonic, nice one.
Yeah.
Social media platform you spend most time on?
LinkedIn.
Audio or video?
Audio.
And media recommendation can be across any platform or service?
The Australian.
Right. I'm going to pause there because if I don't go and
No problem.
if I don't go and strangle this dog, then we're not going to have a very good
No
conversation.
worries.
Just give me 1 second. Okay. Put my little headphones back in.
Get the shotgun and blanket.
Well, it's just a pain. Literally that's three in a row. I have to, because it's, we're recording it when kids are getting home from school, and I sort of put a warning out saying, hey, I'm having a podcast. Don't just be a bit quiet when you get home, and make sure you keep an eye on the dog. And of course, the dog gets let out and barks at anything that moves. Okay, so rapid fire question is done. Interesting. I like the gin and tonic angle. I'm more of a champagne person myself, just because nothing fancy or expensive, but it makes it an occasion. And I'm the only one in the house that drinks. My wife doesn't drink. She hasn't drunk for years. So sitting by myself with nothing else to enjoy but a drink with bubbles in it. Anyway, that's probably sharing a bit more than I should have. Okay, this is something you and I have had a bit of a discussion about before. And I just want to put my theory to you. This is in the context of how software might impact the legal profession more broadly.
Yes.
And so I'll put a theory to you, and I'm just keen to hear your response, agree or disagree, adding any comments. So the theory is that we're going to see the emergence of legal digital platforms that are industry specific, that will grow to replace an increasing amount of the day-to-day legal process that's currently undertaken by lawyers and firms, but that the monetization of those services or those platforms will start to shift from the service being provided to a leveraging of the information or the data captured through that service. So, for example, if there is a commercial contracting platform, it's and contracts are created in an online environment, and information from those contracts is captured either in a singular or collective way. Then leveraging that information will start to deliver insights and improvements and other areas of functionality, and people will start to pay for that. As it sort of transitions away from actually doing the process of creating the contract. And to draw a crude example, if you look at something like a Facebook or a Google, both of those are massive worldwide, arguably monopolistic platforms that leverage data through a service that's unrelated to where they make their money. They make their money through advertising, and they can be targeted and effective because of the information people put in to use the apparent functionality or service. Do you think that construct might have an impact on the legal profession? And this comes to why I find Tanda interesting, because I think that employment law is an area where potentially, if this is a thing, if this is a trend, that it might start to become apparent in this industry that you know well.
There's sort of two bits to that, I think. The first is the idea of new digital service providers popping up that solve problems for customers using technology that are currently being solved by lawyers. And that I'm 100% on board with. That I just think that the progress in that is inevitable, and it'll be consistent. Just the chipping away at, I guess, the foundation. That's sort of where we're already at in a lot of ways. I mean, when you and I started out as lawyers, people just got boxes full of documents for discovery, or boxes full of documents for due diligence, and graduates just sat in rooms and read them. I mean,
yes,
one of the
I remember it fondly.
Yeah,
or not so fondly.
One case I worked on. Now, this was right at the turning point of moving to digitization of this sort of stuff. But this would have been maybe one of the. I walked into the Blake's office in Sydney, as it was then, and just led into a meeting room and was just confronted by a wall full of boxes, and that was discovery. And I just sat there for a week and had a dictaphone and dictated our our list for things that we were going to request copies of. And none of that would happen now. Everything, you just get it on a screen. And so, I mean, that's just the start. I mean, it'll just keep, things like that will keep happening. People keep solving little problems, or little problems in particular industries, or that's inevitable. And then, so the second part of that is fascinating, and this sort of thing already exists, and it exists in our industry. So some workforce management providers in Australia are funded by, for example, banks, with the purpose of leveraging the employee contacts. You know, you've basically got a captured audience of employees to market to.
Yep.
So that already exists. Now, the critical thing, though, is I think, is that with technology, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because I'm not sure we've ever taken the conversation down this path, is that you have an explosion of new vendors and everyone's having a chop at it, and then you get a consolidation. And there's a real question for me about whether the winners in that consolidation can be funded other than by the service itself. Because you have to solve, you have to be the best at solving the job you're hired for. So you need to be the best at calculating pay. You need to be the best at getting the right people at the right place at the right time. And if you're distracted by making your money from selling, bank accounts, can you ever be the best? It's possible, I guess.
Well, I guess to that, I'd say, I think it depends. I think industry by industry is different, and leveraging contacts for marketing is probably not as much of what I had in mind. I would think about things like, if you've got, like, you're collecting, when you have a solution, say with Tanda, that collects information, like there's a time logging, timesheet functionality as part of the Tanda product suite. So that there is taking some granular information about who works where and when.
Yes.
That of itself is information that is interesting.
Yes.
Like what insights can you draw from that and that alone? Like some, but there's that alone. I don't think is going to be solve all the problems. But I think it's when you start to then you look at that and say, how do we leverage improved business outcomes by optimizing the way we do our work. And part of that is being able to have that core information about what it is that you are doing to a level of detail that you can then start to interlink with other things that enables you to say, well, geez, we didn't realize that, if we were doing this in this way, that wasn't best practice, and we can make, we can optimize things there and make that more efficient, so make the business more viable. And so it's more collecting the operational information and being able to analyze that in a way that enables for that you can start to feed back into a loop of improving the way that business is carried out.
Gotcha.
To give you a different example, so in the space that I'm interested in commercial real estate and leasing in particular, the lease. So if you go and you say, look, there's an office building. What's that office building work? What is it worth? And then you go and have a look at the evaluation model that determines what it's worth. It's effectively looking at all of the cash flows for that particular asset and applying some other, some factors as well. But how much money do we get out? How much money do we put in? How do we expect that money to increase over time? How likely are we to be filling that space when someone leaves at the end of their lease? And so what you have in the lease itself, or the aggregate information of all of the leases of a particular asset, is at least the majority of all of the data points you need to determine what the thing is worth.
Yes. And
so then I look at that and I think that is and currently that's how valuation works, but it's quite a crude process because leases are cumbersome and data transfer isn't precise, and there's a time lag and lots of other things. So there is a way, if you look at it and go, well, if we got our hands on the process of creating these leases, we could, and we got that at a critical mass so that we could start to get insights into how the market was moving. You're getting indicators about market activity and inputs into a valuation process that are of the highest quality and value to an industry. So I look at that and I'd say, well, already say the process of leasing as a legal good is highly commoditized.
Yes.
And it there's a lot of price pressure that comes with that, and so is it too far-fetched a notion to say that, look, that will be all captured in a process, in a software process. At some point there'll be winners and losers and consolidation. So in 5 or 10 years' time, maybe half or, there's one or two providers in the market that do that.
Yep.
And are they then going to charge, is the meter going to turn over for every lease that happens when the software facilitates 99.9% of the process that lawyers would currently undertake? Or are you going to be monetizing that platform by the information you can give back to the owners of those assets and the people taking leases in those assets about how to optimize their business when all that information is to hand? So it's for me it's, because I know commercial real estate, that is quite a logical extension.
Yes.
It's not as clear-cut, I think, in other industries, and I don't know other industries as well. But I just think it's an interesting point, in my head at least, to say that information from the legal process has enormous value, and there could be a world where that information is captured with an efficiency and an accuracy that enables it to be the point of leverage and the point of value that might start to overtake the legal process itself.
Yes. You're very right. Can you feed back the information that you get from those processes and monetize that information? I guess in a way. So I look at it through. No, let's use your example. So, is the end customer in your case the law firm that you're doing the due diligence for? Is it the client of the law firm? Who?
What we currently do? Yeah. What we currently do is not what I just described, but
yeah.
Yep.
Because if what you're talking about is feeding the data that you have back in to sort of create new opportunities for automation,
Yes.
and monetizing that, then yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the sort of the obvious step, I think, with compliance and reg tech and all that. So it's optimizing the information you get, and using the information you get. So not necessarily to aggregate it and sell it separately, but so to use Tanda as an example, we definitely take the customers take that information that is in the system. They add in their own information around sales and forecasting and to optimize rosters and gain efficiencies that way. So it does loop back around, and that's how we monetize those insights.
And I think that's, I mean, in my perhaps naive, but my optimistic viewpoint is that that's how that would work. It's less about, say, Andrew, I'm taking your information from your interaction with the system and I'm using that to sell to other people.
Yes.
And it's more about saying, well, Andrew, you're engaging with this platform for a particular purpose, and as part of the value that we can deliver, we can not only deliver on that specific thing, that sort of that legal contractual process, for example, but we can give you all these other insights that come from you and everyone else who participates here in, a consensual and anonymized basis to be able to help you do what you do better.
Yes.
And similarly for, in the example I gave in commercial leasing or commercial real estate, it's it's not an underhanded sneaking away of information and monetizing it for others' benefit. It's saying, we can effectively pool information in a way that allows us all to raise our game. I think it's interesting. I think that leveraging information or data generated through legal process is an enormous area of opportunity and an enormous threat, I think, to law firms, as if the business model changes such that the thing that always underpinned the revenue that of a lot of legal practices, if that starts to get eroded by these kinds of things, and you actually don't make money from that anymore, that's a challenge.
Well, I mean, I kind of think that the inevitable outcome of these types of technologies is that the less sophisticated, the next least sophisticated thing gets automated, and that's just will be a steady process until technology does everything except for the things that just cannot be automated, which isn't necessarily that much. And I think I probably imagine a future different to perhaps you and others, but there is a lot of stuff that gets done that computers could do better if they were trained in the right way.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I often describe lawyers, and it sounds bad to start with, but I describe lawyers as highly paid administrators and highly educated administrators.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that they're being paid an amount more than they're worth. It's not to say that it's an easy thing to do or to do well, because that's not the case. It's a tough job. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of wrangling of information and management of things, and you've got to set the table before you can have the meal, if I can put it that way. Yeah. There's a lot of when we do due diligence, there's an enormous amount of work that we do to get it to the point that we know that we're looking at the right thing.
Yes.
And so you might spend 30-40% of your entire the amount of time you'll put into that exercise, making sure you've got everything you need and you've removed the things that are not relevant, and then you're looking at the right thing. And that kind of preparatory work, that organizational work, is something that software does well. So I think there's a risk around that. I think there's certainly going to be new value that sits on top. The question is really whether one can keep up with the other, and time will tell. Time will tell, I think. Now, to that, because we're coming close to time, and I'm conscious of your time here. Give me some predictions. Look forward, say 5 years and 10 years. What does the practice of employment law look like in those time horizons?
I would say more, probably more stuff around litigation, like the rats and mice stuff, like contract creation and stuff like that. Well, not rats and mice, vanilla stuff like that. Just think less and less of that. People will pay less, be willing to pay less for it. It'll be so standardized. But there's still a role for people on litigations and the really hard thinking stuff in acquisitions and stuff like that. As I was on the way out, investigations have become bigger and bigger now. I can't see that changing because society has kind of drifted in this direction of complaint and wanting resolution on complaints, and everything has to be investigated. And so more and more company resources are getting dedicated to turning the cannons back on themselves in a way. I mean, when I started,
it also prompts a question of compliance as well, though, doesn't it? What we were talking about before about having the information at your fingertips to make for a more efficient process. When you say that, I think of these are, as they say in startup land, these are problems that need to be solved. These are challenges that software could come to assist with, I think, so that the retrospective, the investigation is not so much about the work to figure out exactly what happened. You're able to more effectively have that presentation of facts or circumstances upon which you can then, draw conclusions or develop strategies or other things like that.
Yeah. But, the practice of law hasn't evolved so much in, the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, people have iPhones, so people are constantly contactable, which means they can just do law all the time and be available all the time. And so that trend will probably keep going. But things have sort of drifted around in terms of mix of things to do. But the whole law firm model, or at least it is in the big firms, is to train people to think and to act like you, so that when you're not there, they just become the next person who thinks and acts like you. I mean, it's some sort of asexual reproduction thing that's going on. And
that's the soundbite right there. You know that, don't you?
It evolves in a direction, and being a law graduate now is a whole lot different to being a law graduate when I was a law graduate. And that's all a good thing and a right thing. And I think things like diversity and stuff like that, it's all headed in the right direction. And so there are evolutions like that. But even the even the female partners are still trained to think the same way. They're still trained to deliver that product in a very similar way, and they'll have their own finesse on that, and that's good. And other people will think slightly differently, but it's still the same model. So I watch it unfold now. It's still it
hasn't changed much despite all of
exactly.
The advances in technology haven't really changed the look and feel of a law firm.
No, and
as much as you might have thought.
No, I don't think it really will. I think it'll take things away. Is probably what technology will do. Yeah. And what do you think?
Look, I think it. I think there's a progression. It's the frog boiling analogy. I think so. There'll be a progression where. The business model of a law firm still, even though the biggest firms do a lot of work that requires incredibly bright, hardworking people to do very challenging things, and they get paid, they get paid fair value for that. But the business model still relies on this model of leverage.
Yes.
And when the work that is that leveraged work, that where you're paying people in your team relatively less compared to the amount that they can bill, when that starts to fall away such that it becomes more and more just the work of the leading expert, so more towards the top of the triangle, I suppose you could put it that way.
Yes.
I think then the business model is undermined.
Yes.
And I think things then change.
Yes.
By all accounts, law firms are living their best life at the moment. You see a lot of stories about, bonuses and other things. So the big firms certainly seem to be doing well. But I think there will come a point where, things will start to fall off. Quickly. And I don't think, I've shared my view in that theory I put forward before. I think there will be broader platforms, software platforms that will start to pick up legal process within industries, and they won't just it won't just be legal tech. It will be something that solves a number of problems integrated, because the legal process, certainly in a commercial context, is integrated with lots of other things. So when those things start to come to the fore, and they're still in their formative stages, I think when those things start to come to the fore and it erodes the leverage model, then I think you start to see change. But as to how quickly that will happen, I don't know. I agree, it's not happening at the moment.
I think probably two things. One, I agree with you. I mean, I agree with that analysis that technology erodes the leverage model, and it's something that law firms are grappling with. How do you train people if no one wants to pay for them to be doing the work? And that's something that will sort of become more and more heightened. But I think it'll affect law firms asymmetrically. I think it'll affect sort of smaller firms and the mid-tiers faster than it'll affect.
I think so.
And then if it starts to do that, the people start making different decisions about what they study. I mean, one big problem with the legal industry is that too many people are lawyers, and there are too many people coming through law schools. If people start making different decisions about joining the industry in the first place, then maybe you have fewer people in those roles, in those junior roles. There's less leverage, but you can then still charge more. Do you know what I mean? It won't necessarily be the demand side might be offset to some degree by the supply.
I think it'll be interesting to watch.
It will be.
I don't think the idea about how do we train lawyers, I don't see that as a challenge. I just think as the business model evolves and the skill sets change, you will train people for the skills that they need in the senior roles. So you wouldn't train a graduate now with the kind of stuff that I did when I was at that level. And similarly, I think that in 5 years' time, they won't be putting graduates through the same process that they do now. They'll need to be more, I think they probably will have, they may start to have less. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll still have quite a broad base, but people will more quickly find their way into other roles, and it becomes a more accepted pathway. I don't know how that will shake out, but I think that I think you'll have a smaller number of people at the top, because you're always going to need the smartest girl or guy in the room to be dealing with those hard questions. But they will have to charge more to make up for the fact that they don't have the leverage. And then I think firms probably get smaller. I think they collaborate more. I mean, just as a personal anecdote, we're finding after a number of years of targeting the commercial parties directly, because initially law firms weren't interested effectively in outsourcing parts of their work, that law firms are turning around now and are very interested in outsourcing work that they look at and they go, it's evolved to a point where an outfit that is set up specifically to do that thing and to do that cost effectively and leveraging technology to the highest degree, we want to go there because it doesn't make sense for us to try and do everything anymore. So they start to, a few line items in, revenue line items start to fall away. I think the mix changes. So whether it's a falling off a cliff or a steady evolution, I'm not sure. At this point, it's a steady evolution, if anything, but it will be interesting. That's for sure. We can talk more about it. I think we've probably come to time, Andrew. There, I have on the list that I shared with you before. There are a number of things here we haven't even got to, which is disappointing because I was keen to talk with them. But there's so many good things that you've shared. So thank you for that. I have a final question I ask everyone on the podcast. I ask, what's your current obsession? So what's something that doesn't have to do with work or family that you find yourself spending a lot of time in? Doesn't have to be particularly profound. You know, you might be binging on something at Netflix, or it might be a great song, or what's capturing, what are you obsessing over that you want to share with the world?
I'm on parental leave, so I'm obsessing over my twins, and I am obsessing over a fellow named Jim Collins. I don't know if you've read Good to Great.
Good to Great, yeah.
I listened to Good to Great, and then I listened to Good to Great again, and then I listened to all of his other books a few times, and just some great stuff in there.
Is that the one, a few years ago, that I read Good to Great, and then is that the one where they were looking at the CEO, like they were looking at sort of individual factors of what makes a successful company, and one that stuck in my mind was whether like a figurehead CEO was a positive or negative thing. Like, do you need somebody out there that's a really visible figurehead for a company or not? Am I remembering the right book?
The concept of level 5 leadership, I think.
Right.
And can you be a level 5 leader and be the guy on the front page, or girl on the front page of the paper, or the front business page, touting how great you are and your business transformation skills and yada yada. And their analysis was that it's not impossible to be that person, but you're just more likely to find the best type of leader, so the level 5 leader being the person whose ambition is for the company and the progress of the company rather than personal ambition, in a different package to that. Yes, but that's one of the insights. I just think it's so well researched, and I liked the fact that it was more scientific than a lot of the books, business books out there, which are mostly personal experience and reflection.
Well, it is a classic, isn't it? Like, that's when they give a list of top 10 business books to read, that is regularly on it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, you maybe want to go back and have another look at that. I certainly enjoyed it when I read that a few years back. Andrew, this has been fun.
It has. I always enjoyed chatting. Thanks for having me on, Alistair. I really enjoy chatting with you about these things.
It's my pleasure, and no doubt we'll continue this conversation and go a bit deeper down the rabbit hole at another point, perhaps not on the podcast, but I hope we can do that.
Indeed.
Thanks very much.
Look forward to it. Cheerio.
That was Andrew Stirling, Head of Product Compliance at Tanda, and I am Alistair Fitzgerald, the CEO of Field. We are the leading solution in the Australian market for lease portfolio due diligence. If you're buying or selling commercial real estate assets, or a law firm advising such parties, or a tenant looking to better understand and leverage its lease portfolio, or a transaction advisory firm regularly dealing with large quantities of leases, let us turn your leases into action. Find out more at fieldql.com. Thanks again for listening. Catch you on the next episode.